You know exactly what you need to do. There's that one thing sitting in the back of your mind, waiting. Maybe it's writing that report, studying for an exam, starting your passion project, or even something as simple as cleaning your room. And yet, every time you think about doing it, you suddenly remember something important you have to check. Your messages, your emails, your favorite YouTube channel. Before you know it, hours have slipped away, and that task? Still undone. It's frustrating. And if you're like most people, you probably blame yourself. You think, why am I so lazy? Why can't I just get it together? But what if I told you this isn't a discipline problem? What if the real reason you can't focus has nothing to do with willpower and everything to do with how your brain is wired? Every time you check your phone, scroll through social media, or binge watch another episode, your brain gets a tiny hit of dopamine, the chemical that makes you feel good. It's the same chemical that keeps people hooked on junk food, video games, and gambling. And here's the thing, your brain doesn't care how you get that dopamine, just that you do. Now, compare that to the task you've been avoiding. Writing an essay, zero immediate reward. Reading a boring textbook, even worse. Your brain doesn't get a rush of excitement from these things. Instead, it sees them as effort, as work, and it immediately starts looking for an escape. That's why every time you try to start, you feel that pull to do something else, something easier. It's not a lack of motivation, it's not laziness, it's simply your brain choosing the path of least resistance. Here's how it happens. 1. You sit down to do the important thing. 2. It feels overwhelming, boring, or just too hard. 3. Your brain offers a quick escape. Just check your phone for a second. 4. That second turns into 5 minutes, then 10, then an hour. 5. Now, you feel guilty for wasting time. But instead of starting, you distract yourself even more to avoid that guilt. And the cycle repeats. The worst part? Every time you give in to distractions, you train your brain to need them. You reinforce the habit of avoiding discomfort, making it even harder to focus the next time. The scariest thing is that most of us don't even realize we're stuck in this loop. We think we're just bad at concentrating or that we lack discipline. But in reality, we've built a life filled with tiny, convenient distractions that keep us from ever fully engaging in deep work. And until you break that pattern, until you remove those easy escapes, getting anything done will always feel like an uphill battle. So, how do you escape? How do you make your brain actually want to do the hard stuff? That's where boredom comes in. But we'll get to that soon. Think about the last time you were truly bored. Not just kind of bored, where you had your phone nearby, ready to scroll at any moment. I mean the kind of boredom where there was nothing to do, no notifications, no background music, no distractions. If you're like most people, that probably hasn't happened in a long time. And that's exactly the problem. Your brain has been trained, without you even realizing it, to avoid boredom at all costs. The moment there's even a hint of stillness, you reach for something to stimulate you. You check your phone, open a new tab, turn on a podcast, or scroll through an endless feed of content. But here's the scary part. Every time you do this, you make it harder to focus on real work. Humans weren't always like this. A few decades ago, boredom was a normal part of life. You had moments of stillness, you had time to think. But now, every empty second is filled with something. Whether it's a notification, a quick dopamine hit from social media, or a random YouTube video you didn't even mean to click on. The result? Your brain has become addicted to constant stimulation. This is why focusing on something difficult, reading, writing, problem solving, feels unbearable. Your brain has learned that there's always an easier, more instantly rewarding alternative. Why struggle through writing an email when you can check Instagram? Why sit in silence thinking about your goals when you can watch a funny video? Why force yourself to do something uncomfortable when distraction is right there? And here's the kicker. The more you feed that craving for stimulation, the worse it gets. The more you let yourself escape into distractions, the more unbearable boredom becomes. This is why people struggle so much with deep work. It's not that you can't focus. It's that your brain has been conditioned to avoid the feeling that comes right before focus, boredom. And yet, boredom is the only thing that makes real productivity possible. Here's why. When you strip away all distractions, when you sit in silence with nothing pulling your attention, your brain has no choice but to engage with something. And if the only thing available is that important task you've been avoiding, then suddenly, you'll do it. This isn't theory. It's how your brain works. In fact, studies show that when people are left alone with absolutely nothing to do, many would rather electrocute themselves than sit in boredom. That's how badly our minds want any form of stimulation. But when you embrace boredom, when you let yourself sit in that discomfort, your brain adapts. It starts making the hard thing feel engaging simply because it has no alternative. Imagine you're in a completely empty room, no phone, no internet, no music. Just you and a single task, writing, studying, brainstorming, whatever it is you need to do. At first, your brain will resist. You'll feel restless, anxious, desperate for a distraction. But then something strange happens. Your brain starts to focus, not because you forced it to, but because it needs something to engage with. And suddenly, the thing that once felt impossible, concentrating, working, creating, becomes the only thing left to do. This is the power of boredom. But most people never experience it because they never allow themselves to. So, if you feel like you can't focus, like productivity is impossible, ask yourself, when was the last time I let myself be bored? Chances are, that's the problem. You've probably told yourself this before. I just need to try harder. Maybe you've even set a goal, created a plan, and told yourself, this time will be different. You were ready to power through, push past resistance, and finally, do the thing you've been putting off. And yet, nothing changed. Days went by, and that task, still undone. That project, barely started. That habit, already broken. It's frustrating. It feels like failure. But here's the truth. The problem isn't you. It's the fact that you're relying on willpower. And willpower is weak. Most people treat willpower like a muscle, something you just need to strengthen. But that's the wrong way to think about it. Willpower isn't a limitless resource. It's not something you can just summon whenever you want. In reality, it's more like your phone's battery. The more you use it throughout the day, the faster it drains. That's why. You might start the morning motivated, but completely burn out by the afternoon. You can make good choices for a few hours, but then suddenly, everything feels impossible. You can force yourself to focus for a little while, but eventually, distractions win. This is why motivation hacks don't work. They might get you started, but they don't last. Because at the end of the day, no matter how badly you want to be productive, your brain will always take the easiest route. And if you're relying on sheer willpower to fight against distractions, you're fighting a battle you'll never win. Think about this. If you had to make a conscious decision about everything, what to eat, what to wear, how to walk, how to breathe, you'd be exhausted before noon. So your brain does something smart. It builds shortcuts. It creates habits and automatic responses so you don't have to waste energy thinking about everything. This is why if you normally grab your phone first thing in the morning, you'll do it without thinking. If you usually check social media when you feel stuck, you'll reach for it on autopilot. If you're used to avoiding difficult tasks, your brain will always steer you towards something easier. No amount of willpower can override a habit that's already wired into you. And that's why trying harder never works. If you can't rely on willpower, then what do? Simple. Make it impossible to fail. If you can't stop checking your phone, put it in another room. If you procrastinate on work, remove every distraction from your workspace. If you waste time on social media, block the sites completely. Your brain will take the path of least resistance. So the key is to make productivity easier than procrastination. Take this to the extreme. Imagine you are locked in a blank room with nothing, no phone, no internet, no entertainment, just you and the work you need to do. After a few minutes of boredom, guess what? You'd start working. Not because you suddenly felt like it, but because it would be the only thing left to do. This is how you actually get things done. Not by trying harder, but by removing the need to try at all. So if you feel stuck, if you feel unmotivated, stop blaming yourself. Stop thinking you just need more willpower. Instead, change the way your environment forces you to act. Because once you do that, productivity stops being a battle and starts being inevitable. Let's be honest, if given the choice between doing something difficult and doing something entertaining, you will always choose entertainment. Not because you're lazy, but because your brain is wired that way. It's why you check your phone instead of writing that report. It's why you scroll social media instead of working out. It's why you suddenly feel the overwhelming urge to clean your entire apartment when it's time to start that big project. Your brain isn't looking for what's important. It's looking for what's comfortable. But what if you had no other option? What if the distractions, the easy way out, completely disappeared? Would you finally get things done? The problem isn't that you're unmotivated. It's not that you don't care about your goals. It's that you've made it too easy not to do them. See, your brain works on relative value. If you have a choice between writing an essay and watching YouTube, YouTube will always win. Not because you don't want to write, but because compared to an algorithm designed to hijack your attention, writing feels like punishment. And that's the key. Comparison is what makes tasks feel unbearable. If you spend all day on high-stimulation activities, fast-cut videos, endless social media, constant notifications, then sitting down to do deep work will feel excruciating. It's not that the task itself is so bad. It's that your brain has been conditioned to expect constant entertainment, and anything less feels like suffering. But here's where things get interesting. If you remove all distractions, if you eliminate every escape route, your brain will have no choice but to make the boring thing more engaging. A fascinating study from the University of Virginia proved this in the most extreme way possible. Participants were placed in an empty room with nothing to do, except sit with their own thoughts. The only alternative? Press a button to electrocute themselves. Sounds ridiculous, right? Who in their right mind would choose pain over doing nothing? Yet 67% of men and 25% of women shocked themselves, some multiple times, just to avoid boredom. That's how much your brain hates having no options. And that's exactly why removing distractions works. When your only choice is to sit in silence or do the task you've been avoiding, your brain will find a way to make the task interesting. Think about it. If you were locked in a blank room with nothing except a book, after enough time, you'd start reading. Not because you suddenly felt like it, but because compared to doing absolutely nothing, reading becomes the most engaging option. This is why people stranded in prison cells or remote locations end up discovering hidden talents, writing novels, solving complex math problems, or becoming deeply introspective. When the distractions are gone, your brain adapts. So if you want to stop procrastinating, stop trying to force motivation. Instead, make it impossible to do anything else. If you can't stop checking your phone, leave it in another room. If you keep getting distracted online, use website blockers. If you can't focus on work, sit in an empty space with nothing but the task at hand. At first, it will feel awful. Your brain will beg for an escape, but within minutes, something strange will happen. You'll start working. Not because you forced yourself, but because compared to staring at a blank wall, even the most boring task becomes engaging. This is the power of no escape. It doesn't require willpower, motivation, or self-discipline. It works because it has to. So if you've been waiting for the perfect moment to be productive, this is it. Let's get one thing straight. Willpower is overrated. Most people think productivity is about pushing through, using sheer force of discipline to get things done. But here's the truth. If something feels hard, you'll avoid it. Not because you're lazy, not because you lack ambition, but because your brain is designed to conserve energy. So, instead of fighting against your own nature, what if you worked with it? What if getting things done wasn't a battle, but something that happened naturally, without force, without guilt, and without the constant internal debate of, should I do this now or later? That's exactly what we're about to fix. Think about the last time you procrastinated. You weren't just sitting there doing nothing. You were doing something else. Maybe you were scrolling your phone, watching YouTube, and rearranging your desk. Whatever it was, you didn't choose to procrastinate. You just fell into the easiest available option. And that's the key. Your environment decides what you do. If distractions are easier than work, distractions will win. If work is easier than distractions, work will win. That's why the real secret to effortless productivity isn't motivation. It's designing your environment so the right choice is the easy choice. Ever noticed how, when healthy snacks are sitting on the counter, you eat them without thinking? But if they're buried in the back of the fridge, you forget they exist. Same principle applies to productivity. If your laptop is surrounded by distractions, your phone, open tabs, gaming consoles, you're not going to magically choose work. But if your workspace is optimized for focus, with nothing but the task in front of you, work becomes the default. Here's how to set this up. 1. Remove the easy escapes. If your phone is next to you, you will check it. Solution: put it in another room. If your favorite websites keep stealing your focus, block them. Make procrastination inconvenient. Make the first step effortless. The hardest part of any task is starting, so remove friction. If you want to write, open a blank document before you start your day. If you want to work out, lay out your gym clothes the night before. The less effort it takes to begin, the more likely you are to follow through. 3. Use physical cues to trigger focus. Your brain associates locations with activities. If you do work only at your desk, your brain will shift into focus mode when you sit there. But if you also watch Netflix, browse Reddit, and play games in the same spot, your brain won't know what to expect. Separate spaces for separate tasks. 4. Shrink your choices. Ever stared at a long to-do list and felt overwhelmed? That's because too many choices lead to decision fatigue. Instead of writing a massive list, give yourself one clear next step. Not write the report, just write the first sentence. Once you start, momentum kicks in. Productivity isn't just about making work easier. It's also about making distractions less tempting. How? By controlling the contrast. If your brain is used to high stimulation activities, TikTok, fast-paced games, endless scrolling, then deep work will feel agonizingly slow. But if you lower your baseline stimulation, focus becomes easier. Start your day with boring. Instead of waking up and instantly grabbing your phone, sit in silence. Go for a walk. Journal. Give your brain a chance to wake up without a dopamine rush. Cut down on instant gratification. If your free time is filled with constant entertainment, real work will feel dull in comparison. Try a dopamine detox. Spend an afternoon with no screens, no music, just simple activities like reading or thinking. You'll be surprised how much your brain craves engagement afterward. Use the no escape rule. If you have a task to do, eliminate every other option. No social media, no background TV. Just one thing in front of you. Your brain will adapt, and suddenly, even the most boring work becomes interesting.